Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's Boss here, and today we're diving right into something that could shake the very foundation of not only the American economy but the entire global financial network. Exploding head, we're talking about something that most people take for granted, economic data, or as some people call it, the numbers that make the world go round. If you're here, you already know financial markets hang on every single data release like unemployment figures, inflation numbers, or GDP stats. These reports don't just move charts, they move trillions, and yes, I said trillions, with a T. So, what's going to happen when all this crucial data starts to crumble? Spoiler alert, it's already happening. It's not just a small hiccup but a catastrophe looming on the horizon. Ready to dive in with me? Let's cut through the noise and show you how this is going to affect not only your wallets but the global economy at large. First, before we go deeper, smash that like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications so you never miss a beat of economic truth. Let's get into it. First things first, understanding why this is so dangerous. The US is the backbone of global financial data, no question about it. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, BEA, and the Census Bureau offer the world's most comprehensive and reliable information, not because they're perfect, but because there's nothing better out there. Companies, investors, analysts, and, heck, entire nations rely on these vital stats to make gigantic decisions that keep economies functioning, investments flowing, and jobs growing. Think about it, we're not just talking about broad actions like the US Federal Reserve cutting rates, no, we're talking about day-to-day decisions from businesses planning expansions, stock traders gambling billions, and even households deciding whether it's the right time to buy a home. And yet, all this financially crucial data is on the verge of slipping into chaos. Why? Because of Trump 2.0, baby. Speaking of Trump, let's talk about how he's coming back to Washington with a vengeance and a plan to slash the federal bureaucracy, focusing directly on cutting wasteful spending. Unfortunately, those budget cuts include funding to keep these data systems afloat. You might be thinking, surely cutting a few million won't be a big deal, right? Think again. Behind those millions in savings is a statistical collapse that could cost not just billions but trillions across global markets. But how is this possible? Here's a big number to chew on, $6.4 trillion. That's how much global stock markets wiped out in a matter of days after a slightly weak US jobs report dropped earlier this year. Mind-blowing, right? Just a single, bad, data point can lead to this level of disaster. The BLS itself is in a brutal financial choke point. After a decade of cuts, it's now more expensive and harder than ever to collect accurate data, thanks in part to falling participation in surveys. If you're slashing budgets or, worse, reducing sample sizes and fudging the metrics, you're playing with fire. What happens when the unemployment reading is so skewed that the Fed makes the wrong call about interest rates? Or, imagine a scenario where inflation data isn't trusted anymore. Chaos, that's what happens. Let me remind you about some of the most recent scandals from the BLS. Earlier this year, we had not one, not two, but three significant missteps. Miscommunication over inflation data with Wall Street firms, an accidental early release of CPI figures, and an embarrassing delay in the August jobs report that triggered a frenzied panic among investors, not my words but theirs. A few major banks managed to get the figures before the general release and took their positions, leaving everyone else in the dust and turning markets upside down. That's not just an oopsie. That's nearly a $6.4 trillion fiasco blaring through the financial system. So, what do you think will happen if budget cuts push these simple mess-ups to systematic breakdowns? Trust me, it's not going to be pretty when hedge funds and investment banks treat BLS data like ancient astrology charts, simply because they can't trust another figure. Now let's dissect what we should really be worrying about going forward, Trump's crusade against wasteful spending. He's handed this mission over to none other than tech mogul and efficiency aficionado, Elon Musk, yes, the man who wants to colonize Mars, and he's claimed he can cut $2 trillion straight out of the federal budget. Hold on a second. Let's get real, the BLS, BEA, and Census Bureau have a combined budget of $2.2 billion. That's 0.03% of total US federal spending. This is pocket change in Washington terms. But the consequences of cutting even a sliver from that already lean budget? Unequivocally catastrophic. Here's how it all breaks down. The Trump administration, or Musk's task force, might view statistical operations as non-essential, but businesses down to small-town American families are making life-changing decisions, from how to spend consumer dollars to where to open new stores, based on these very numbers. Don't even get me started on critical public policies, from healthcare to housing, that depend on these same statistically rigorous reports. Cutting this thin funding means decisions made in complete darkness. There's something deeper here, folks, something that doesn't even carry a price tag, trust. We don't talk enough about the psychological impact of eroded trust in government data. Worldwide, people are growing less willing to engage in surveys, whether due to privacy concerns, disillusionment with their governments, or simply because they no longer believe their answers matter. When fewer people participate, we get lower response rates. The BLS's current population survey, for instance, once boasted 90% participation a decade ago. Now, it's down to around 70% and falling, which is gracefully described as being on budgetary life support. And what's their solution? Cutting sample sizes further. At the same time, many agencies face a crippling dilemma: either reduce participation further or invest in new data collection methods, like shifting surveys to online formats. But online data collection has already backfired. Just ask the UK's Office of National Statistics, ONS, which had a disaster when they switched to online formats, only to learn that data became biased and unusable. You think the US will avoid that trap? Think again. This might seem like an internal US squabble, but wake up, people. This rippling catastrophe doesn't stop in Washington. It's coming for the entire global financial system. Remember the great financial crisis not too long ago? It's worth a stark reminder that poor handling of data back then, from gross domestic product, GDP, estimates to misunderstood inflation figures, set the Fed and other policymakers down a series of blind alleys that compounded financial pain. The BEA, for example, had initially estimated the GDP contraction in the last quarter of 2008 to be around 3.8%. But reality hit harder, the real figure? 8.9%. And why does this happen? Because cutting corners on data prevents us from seeing the full picture when it matters most. Cars, homes, investments, your entire financial future depends on this trust that the data is both accurate and timely. Can you imagine the consequences of getting not just one but many crucial numbers wrong? If you aren't in the USA, you absolutely should still care. The global market relies on America's economic heartbeats. Countries like Germany, Japan, Korea, the whole global north, stand on the information derived from American reports to navigate their own trading strategies, foreign investments, and even domestic monetary policies. Now, take a look around. What if these very indicators start looking more like Swiss cheese, with uncertainty and data gaps sprinkled in between? This is not just hypothetical, it's already hitting home. We've seen it happen to Argentina, Greece, and even China. An opaque economy boosted by falsified or manipulated data can lead to financial disarray and social crises beyond their borders. So, when the U.S. becomes another case of data mismanagement, we're essentially putting the entire global economic system at risk. Take China as an example. Chinese officials, especially at local levels, have been notorious for inflating numbers, especially GDP, just to meet central government targets and secure promotions. The ripple effect? Investors miscalculate risk, global businesses make poor decisions, and financial markets become a quagmire of bad assumptions. Now, picture that same scenario but coming from the United States, arguably the most trusted source of economic data. If America becomes another space where traders, corporations, and nations second-guess every piece of data, it will be chaos. Cracks are already forming. International institutions like the IMF and World Bank draw on U.S. data for their models, influencing billions of dollars in international loans, development projects, and trade agreements. If these organizations can't trust the data flowing from the U.S., their policies will falter, their advice will be miscalculated, and their actions misaligned. Wait, the plot gets even thicker. We're not just talking Wall Street meltdowns and global investment strategies. When data gets messed up, or worse, fudged, it sends shockwaves into other areas of public life. Take public services, local economies, and even social welfare programs. Let me break it down. With bad unemployment numbers, how can policymakers accurately predict labor shortages, the need for stimulus programs, or figure out how much support Americans really need? Lacking data integrity leaves ordinary citizens vulnerable. It's like playing a game of economic charades, except the consequences are real. People's livelihoods, their jobs, housing, healthcare access, all of this will suffer because the data foundation is rotting away. And let's not forget President Biden's, or any future leaders, reliance on accurate, detailed data to push targeted policies. Want to close the racial wealth gap? Implement clever solutions to battle unemployment in depressed rural areas? Without granular, group-specific data, none of this will get done. Think about all the nuanced yet critical decisions every policymaker, whether you support Joe Biden or not, needs to undertake. We're basically saying, good luck running a nation on faulty numbers. And this is not just theory. The jobs report, inflation data, and GDP growth numbers all feed into federal budget decisions. So if you're skeptical about the ramifications, look at the pandemic. We saw, live in real time, how quickly things can spin out of control when mismatched economic data leads to the wrong policy choices at the wrong time. I know some of you might be shaking your heads wondering, isn't there a quick fix? Can't we just modernize? I hear you, but let's talk about what moving to online surveys truly means. Online surveys sound seductive, faster, cheaper, automated, right? Wrong. This solution has been tried, and so far it's been more of a nightmare than a dream. Take a look at the UK's botched attempt at this. By replacing face-to-face interviews with online formats, Britain's Office of National Statistics got horribly unreliable data that was skewed toward specific groups, like older populations, while underrepresenting youth and lower-income people who are typically less tech-savvy or simply harder to reach digitally. This leads to distorted figures, and guess what? You're now basing major policy decisions off of flawed assumptions. While integrating technology into surveys could theoretically improve response rates and data accuracy with enough resources, the truth is that it requires heavy investment upfront, which isn't happening. The current US budget environment won't support these kinds of structural shifts, let alone the kind of near-term algorithmic accuracy needed to keep up with a digital transition. If anything, we're running straight into an even larger data quality crisis by trying to force automation without full preparedness. Plus, keep in mind that the same trust issues people have with traditional surveys multiply on the digital stage. Remember the privacy debates around data from social media or companies like Google and Facebook? Citizens will grow even more reluctant to participate in government-run online surveys, fearing their data will be misused or mishandled, weakening the statistical basis even further. Adding complexity to this digital discussion is the digital divide itself, marking yet another point of concern. Not everyone has equal access to technology, particularly in lower-income, rural, or underserved communities, where undersampling already occurs. According to the Pew Research Center, nearly 13% of Americans, that's more than 40 million people, don't have access to broadband internet. We live in the 2020s, yet a large number of people aren't able to reliably connect to your so-called solution for improving data collection. The moment government agencies abandon in-person or telephone surveys in favor of digital-first approaches, they're feeding into a growing trend of statistical bias, risking error-prone datasets. Let me tell you why that's hands down the dumbest move yet. Rural and lower-income areas, which are often the most reliant on well-targeted public policy programs, might get completely underrepresented in online surveys. So, what do we get? Policies that might look statistically correct but are fundamentally flawed, potentially leaving large swaths of the public in economic freefall. The fact that Trump seems inclined to proceed down this path while also cutting budgets makes it clear that what we're witnessing isn't just short-sightedness, it's self-sabotage on a monumental scale. We can't ignore that many still see US economic data as the global gold standard, despite this long line of pitfalls. Countries like Argentina, Greece, and even China have faced international scrutiny over doctored stats or outright lies aimed at hiding deeper problems. For context, let's recall Argentina during the Kirchner era when manipulated inflation data had gotten so bad that the IMF censured the nation, the first of its kind. Similarly, Greece famously underreported the scale of its debt crisis before the 2009 European financial struggles, only for the house of cards to come crashing down when investors realized the reality of the situation. Despite these examples, many globally funded projects still lean heavily on US data for their decisions, but that's precisely why the current crisis at the BLS, BEA, and Census Bureau is so unsettling. If global trust in America's numbers deteriorates, trust in wider economic systems could rot just as fast. It's laughable that the Trump administration can't seem to see the wider implications that ripple out from a few $1 million in savings that threaten trillions globally. Okay, wrapping this up with one critical message: wake up. This isn't just about budget squabbles or bureaucratic nitpicking. Keeping America's federal stats machinery well-oiled is a public good of the highest global order. Every single person, from everyday citizens to the savviest stock market players, to global economists, depends on the efficacy of these reports to make decisions that impact our collective futures. The crux of the issue, isn't it beyond counterproductive to cut critical resources for a system that directly relates to precise policymaking? It's utterly crazy to think cutting a few million for data collections will not result in errors that eventually cost us many, many trillions. This could break the economy down, one faulty statistic at a time. The US, one of the planet's largest economies, could well drag down global markets with it. At the end of the day, this is exactly like failing to maintain an essential bridge or road. Yeah, the bridge looks operational today, but what's the cost when it eventually collapses after years of underspending and neglect? So if you're like me and you realize just how serious the implications of this chaos are, make sure to send this message far and wide, get loud while we still have time to fend off a full-blown economic disaster. If you agree, and you care about preserving global financial integrity, hit that like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share this message. Thanks for sticking through till the end, and remember, when it comes to your finances, knowing the truth is not just power, it's survival. Stay alert, stay informed. This is Boss, signing off.